All right, everyone. Let's get started here. All right, well, welcome everyone to Front Range Front End for June 2020. My name is Zach Brooks, and I'll be your speaker and MC tonight. I know this is kind of an odd situation we have with the speaker hosting everything, but we thought this would be a little easier technologically, of course, for handling all this. I'm a software developer currently at Frontier Airlines, and I'm also a part of the Jamstack Denver meetup, where, of course, we talk about all aspects of the Jamstack, and which we'll be discussing tonight. We run our meetup every first Wednesday of the month, and Front Range Front End holds theirs first Thursday of the month. So, some back-to-back content right there. You can find out more about us at meetup.com/JamstackDenver or search for Jamstack Denver on YouTube to see some of our past content and meetups if you're interested in that. And also be sure to subscribe to Front Range Front End to make sure you can watch this later or, see all their past talks and future talks. I'd also like to remind everyone that Front Range Front End does have a code of conduct, which you can view on their meetup page. And with that in mind, I just kind of wanted to take a moment to use this platform to echo a sentiment felt by the organizers at Front Range Front End, Jamstack Denver, and myself especially. Considering everything going on in the country right now, it's kind of a tumultuous time, but I felt like I wanted to say something about this. Tech should absolutely be an inclusive space, and we should do everything in our power to make it inclusive, and it shouldn't matter what your background is or, what you look like to be a part of it. I recognize my position as a white male is of privilege in myself, and the Jamstack Denver team want to use that privilege to amplify the voices of our Black and brown members of the deaf community. Black lives matter, and we all have to stand against oppression and injustice to enact the change that is needed to, make progress and see things improve. Like, we all have to recognize things and stand up for it. So I invite you to speak. To invite you to not only want to submit a talk, not only to us at Jamstack Denver, but especially to Front Range Front End. I know Jason Spiller or James Steinbeck would be the two organizers of Front Range Front End would be very interested in having you. I know they're also very inclusive for their community, and they would love to help you, either arrange a talk or even just get your message out there. So yeah. And I also want to say thanks to Jason and James for approaching me to talk about Jamstack tonight. It's something I'm very passionate about, and it's not only a very exciting time for Jamstack, but just web development in general. You got new technology coming out constantly, and there's just so many cool new tech things coming out all the time. So I hope after this talk tonight that you'll be interested not only in Jamstack but trying to find ways to utilize it in your projects going forward. But without further ado, let's jam. So in this talk tonight, I'm going to break down Jamstack into a few ways, starting off with the what, how, and why of Jamstack. Then I'll go into some best practices to get the most out of Jamstack, and then after that, I'll show you some examples of actual production sites that are using Jamstack. To show you kind of the variety of how it can be used and how it's more than just a blog or portfolio site that you probably see all the time. And then finally, I'm going to show you some of my personal favorite tools/toolkits that I like to use when developing with Jamstack, and show you some of the newer ones to keep an eye on, because there's so many new things entering the space and they're kind of branding themselves as a Jamstack tool. And also, I'll be doing my best to clear up any misconceptions throughout this talk. And also, please hold your questions until the end. That's why it's a little easier for me to keep an eye on the chat, so I can directly answer any questions that you may have. So I'll let you know when you can start getting those together, or write them down throughout the talk, and I'll answer them accordingly. So, what is the Jamstack? Well, to start, it's a term, an acronym coined by Matt Billman, co-founder and CEO of Netlify, to describe a newer software architecture and philosophy that adheres to three main components to building a site or application, which are JavaScript, APIs, and Markup. The Jamstack is not about specific technologies you have to use to build a website or application. It's focused on building sites and apps that deliver better performance, higher security, lower cost of scaling, and an overall better developer experience. It's about how you're building the site and not a set of predefined tools that you have to use, unlike something like, say, the mean stack or the lamp stack. which those define like, oh, you have to use these specific technologies for it to fit in that space. Jamstack sites also don't have to be, like I just said, don't have to be tied to a specific set of technologies. So it can be you get a lot of flexibility in choosing which exact tools that fit your project, like design or what you need with whatever project you're actually building. Another aspect of Jamstack is that it simplifies the development process and gives developers the ability to just focus on the development part of the project and not have to worry as much about, setting up servers or databases or trying to decide, oh, well, how are we going to host this content management system? Like utilizing Jamstack, you kind of get around that, and it empowers the developers to actually, focus on building a good application. So, like I just mentioned, Jamstack is built up of three main components: JavaScript, APIs, and Markup. And that's where you get the acronym Jam from. And if JavaScript, APIs, and Markup sounds familiar, then you probably already built or used a Jamstack application. I really like this diagram because I think it helps illustrate the acronym very well, and as it helps clarify which tools fit into specific parts of Jamstack. And the term was coined as a way to make the term static site, which you've probably heard a bunch, a little bit more meaningful. So while your first inclination would be to think that we're going to be building a static site in the end, well, yes, but actually no. It's become much more than just a static site. There's a lot more you can do with it. It's become much more robust, and there's a lot of really great first-class development tools out there that we'll go a little bit more in depth in later when we get to the tools section of this talk. So again, let's start off with our good friend JavaScript. Some people love it, others hate it. Either way, it's a fundamental piece in Jamstack. This also does include TypeScript. I should specify Angular would be classified under that. But then we would have to call it the Tim Tam stack, as I want to try to get that coin. Phil Hawksworth, if you're out there, Tim Tam stack, let's make it happen. This is the component that handles the client-side rendering of your site and adds the dynamic and interactive functionality. And this is also where UI frameworks and libraries like React, Vue, and Svelte are implemented. So another thing is you could also just build a Jamstack site with just vanilla JS if you really wanted to. That's totally an option. And then we got APIs. So utilizing the strength of APIs is how we make Jamstack applications dynamic, which this is where like kind of taking the term static site and building upon it really gets implemented. And this could be anything from, authentication services like Auth0. I think is it Auth0 or Auth0? I never know. Google Analytics, or using headless CMSs is a very common way to deliver content to a site through an API. But you can also use things like Stripe for payments or Shopify for e-commerce. Like there's a bunch of cool APIs that you can use to build upon your static site, so to speak. Something you could also do is you could also build your own APIs and host them as serverless functions. We actually ended up doing that at Frontier Airlines with Azure Functions and hosted them on Azure's cloud platform to create a sort of microservice with all of our APIs. And then we got Markup. So something I've seen before is people get confused that Markup means Markdown, which is not true. Markup is the semantic HTML of your site or application. And this can either be handwritten HTML or the code that compiles down to HTML, but it's the first part that you're serving to your client. And to be considered a Jamstack application, the HTML needs to be served statically, which basically means not being dynamically rendered from a server. So something like Nuxt server-side rendering would not be considered Jamstack, but what's cool about Nuxt is you can actually use it as a static site generator, so you get that flexibility with different platforms of what you're trying to build in that sense. Static site generators are a big part of what you've probably had associated with Jamstack before. What's really cool about them is that they give you the ability to pre-build HTML files from some or all of your API sources. So something like blog content is a perfect example of this because there's probably one or many blog posts within a site or one to many pages of similar types within a single API source. So what static site generators allow you to do is pre-build each of those blog posts from a template into HTML files, ready to be served by a CDN to a client. So you're handling a lot of all of that really in the build process, so everything's pre-rendered and ready to go for you. And with that, you want to try to pre-build as much of your site as possible. Like there will be certain scenarios where you can't, but you could still be a Jamstack site and have non-pre-rendered parts of your site, but a majority of it should be pre-rendered. So now that we've kind of gone over some of those core concepts there, let's talk about why you would want to build with Jamstack. The first one is speed. Since you're serving up static HTML files, static HTML files over CDN, your users are not waiting for the server to build the page request and then send it to the client. You're either serving a page as static HTML file or using the client to hydrate the page with, say, Vue or React or just JavaScript in general. And then adding some dynamic pieces after the page is loading, like maybe you need to call in user content or dynamic pieces that don't take up a lot of resources that can be done after the initial page load. So something I understand from say how Gatsby works is that they actually pull in the HTML first and try and get that initial load down, and then they spin up a React app on top of it and to manipulate the DOM and handle the dynamic pieces from there. But with that said, I haven't used a ton of Gatsby. So I could be a little off base on that. Welcome to have someone correct me on that if I'm totally off base on that one. Next, we got scalability. This ties back into the speed aspect of Jamstack, because if you're serving static HTML files off a CDN or other hosting, other static hosting, then you're more or less can scale to any size needed, and most CDNs even focused around Jamstack scale automatically for you, which is a really nice benefit that you get. And then, of course, cost. Jamstack sites are much cheaper to run, not only because static assets and content are pretty cheap to host, but also a lot of API services are very generous in the amount of transactions that you can be made and the cost of those transactions. For instance, hosted Azure functions allow for 1 million executions of that function for free before they even begin to charge you. So, and then after that, it's only 20 cents per million executions. So the cost is pretty freaking low to entry. Of course, this depends on if you need a different plan or you need different scalability or things like that. It kind of just depends on the application you're building, of course. Then we got security. Security is a big benefit because not only are you having to you're not having to maintain a server yourself, and a lot of the security overhead is handled by providers. For APIs and things like that. Of course, then you're relying on those providers to keep things secure, which that could be considered a downside if you don't necessarily know what they're doing all the time. But I mean, it's hard to it's definitely an outweighing, you're trying to balance the scales of all right, well, we can let them handle it and not have a headache to, handle security on it. It kind of depends on what you're trying to do. And again, since hosting static assets and pages are typically more secure, you probably you can spend a lot more time focusing on all right, what content should be private versus public, and ensuring, users' information can't be compromised within those systems or it's not getting transmitted across your site at all. So again, but while majority of security concerns are kind of abstracted away to the providers, there's still aspects you'll need to consider based on the needs of your application that you're building. And with that, since you don't have to maintain a server yourself, you have one less headache to worry about. It makes it easier to update your front end with either a new framework or tools, since you're no longer tied to a specific server or set of tools like with other types of stacks. For instance, you could change your site from say a React-based site to something you want to move to Svelte. You want to make it way more lightweight and performant. Since you're relying on third-party APIs, you don't have those tied to your front end. So you get a lot of flexibility in that sense because now you can kind of change things on how you want to build your site, and you're not tied to that, but you can still adhere to the core principles of the Jamstack. All right, so now that we've kind of talked about what makes up a Jamstack site and why you would want to build one, let's talk about some best practices that I found um, to get to that you should probably utilize in order to get the most out of the tools that you choose to use. Because while most Jamstack tools and sites can be performant out of the box, they're only going to be as fast as you make them. For instance, a big aspect of that could slow down your site is if your APIs are slow. Now, if you're using a third-party API and they encounter issues, or their servers are having a rough time, then I mean that is partially out of your control, and that's kind of one of the, I guess, downsides is you're kind of relying on them to keep things performant. But you should do everything that you can to ensure the API requests that you or your client are making are performant. So, for instance, if you're building your own custom APIs, then sorry, I'm trying to figure out which way I need to look into the camera. Where was I? Yeah. So if you're building your own custom APIs, you want to make sure that you're not sending way too much data to the client. That's gonna, the response time is gonna increase, or the payload's just gonna be massive. That it's gonna bog down the performance of your site. You should also try and have as many of those API calls on the server as possible, so that you're limiting how many requests the client has to make in order to load the page. So if you can have your API calls made on build time, like from just data sources, then you can just focus on having your static pages serve, your static pages served. So when the client gets them, that they don't have 4 or 5 API calls they have to make to get dynamic content. They can, or even using things like lazy loading for images to improve performance on that aspect. You should also limit how many API calls again you're making from the client in general. Again, this doesn't mean you can't have any, because of course you want dynamic pieces. You're going to need those in some way, like say search requests for products, or even like a logged in users data. Like that has to be dynamic. It just has to be, unless you're doing some aggressive caching, which may or may not be the best idea. Probably don't recommend that necessarily. Again, you should limit how many calls the client needs to handle overall, though. And then, depending on what tools you're using, can impact the client-side performance of your site. For instance, if you're using a static site generator like Gatsby, you may actually need to add plugins or extra Webpack configurations to improve performance. Even though Gatsby claims it's performant out of the box, which I believe in most cases it is, there can definitely be improvements made to help performance in some regards, depending on what you're building. It's definitely like a case by case basis though. And then again, kind of one thing you'll tend to see is performance being touted as a big boost from like Jamstack tool sites. So that, for instance, the static site generator 11T is known for having its incredible performance out of the box. That's something I keep seeing all the time. I'm on Twitter and things of like, oh my gosh, 11T is awesome. Like, look how fast and performant it is for this massive application I built. So it's definitely something to keep an eye out for, and I'm going to talk about them a little bit more later. Something else that I've seen a lot of is trying to load external fonts. Those can definitely hit your performance a lot. And again, kind of handling images is another thing to kind of keep in mind. So one recommendation for fonts is often to rely on native system fonts instead of trying to load in a bunch of third-party scripts, just because that's gonna increase load time, that's gonna increase things, or bog down performance. So, but again, fonts are kind of their own talk on their own, so I'm not gonna go too in depth on them for now. And then markup. So while this may not be exciting as the hot new tool or JavaScript based thing, you can truly make a great site by just having great markup. This means not using like JavaScript for animations when CSS or Sass or any other preprocessors could do it for you, or even having unnecessary component structures that don't make sense, where you're loading extra things on the extra like elements on the page, or even alignment things where it could be done with, say, like a Flexbox layout or even a CSS grid layout. The markup is the foundation of your site, and you really want to make it a great experience. So focus on when you're building your front end, focus on like making sure all your HTML makes sense, and it's going to be the best way to write that HTML. And And then, it's debating if I should have talked about these first, but we're going to talk about them now. These are some other recommendations from jamstack.org. And I think they're a solid starting point for any Jamstack project that you should try to adhere to as much as possible. The first one is everything should live in a Git repo so that anyone could easily set up the code with, just a simple like pull down the code, npm install or whatever, dependencies they need, without having to rely on, complex installs or DLLs or things like that. That's one thing at Frontier that I wish we could rectify, because we have a very complicated setup process, and it kind of takes out a lot of our dev time trying to help other new developers get up and running, because they're running into issues with their site. Another point is that your entire site should be served from a CDN, since Jamstack sites don't rely on server-side code, and they should not live on a single server. That's how, by not being tied to a single server, that's how they unlock speed, performance, and scalability. One downside to the static approach of Jamstack is that if your content changes on a CMS or whatever data source, you will need to rebuild your site because it is static, and the changes aren't going to be visible right away. So one thing that you can do is automating this process to solve a lot of that frustration. Excuse me. And you can do this with either something like a webhook or utilizing a tool like Netlify to handle it for you. Along with that, if you are making a lot of changes, you don't want those things to be inconsistent while things are waiting to complete, loading a bunch of images that you just uploaded. So atomic deploys solve this problem by waiting for all changes to be completed before they're actually deployed. The way it works is a deploy has either been fully executed or not at all. It doesn't try to piecemeal in changes of this image loaded first, let's deploy that. It's like, no, we're waiting for everything here. Even that last one that's, maybe it wasn't the most optimized image and it's a little bigger. We're going to hold on him. And then again, since we're using static files, when we make changes to redeploy our site, we want to see those changes live right away. So it could take minutes or even hours in some cases for the cache to invalidate. But something that Netlify provides is instant cache validation, by which handles this step for us by pushing the changes automatically once an upload is complete. And this is just part of their build process, which is really great. Some other CDNs can also provide this feature, but it just kind of depends on the solution. So you may have to do it yourself, create a webhook that handles this for you or something like that. So it's kind of recommended that you try to either have a solution ready to implement yourself or use a provider like Netlify to do it for you. And I just want to clarify that Netlify, like any of the companies I speak about tonight, did not pay me to say good things about them. I just like using them, and they have great tools. And of course, Netlify they implemented they coined Jamstack, so it makes sense that they're creating a lot of these tools to solve those problems. All right, so now that we've covered the basics and some best practices, let's take a look at some examples of sites that are using Jamstack already. And just kind of what I hope you get out of this part is that it kind of shows you the range of different types of applications and sites you could use with Jamstack, and not just, oh, here's my blog built with Jamstack, which, I will admit I've done that. That's a good starting point, especially if you're a newer developer or you want to experiment with Jamstack. But hopefully this kind of gives you some ideas of, okay, once I could, make a push for this at work or try to get these tools or, start moving towards the Jamstack framework for my next project. So one site and company that has been making a big push recently for Jamstack is Microsoft. Their docs.microsoft.com is currently built with Jamstack, and I unfortunately was unable to find the exact quote from one of their developers who worked on this, but I believe he said it was around something like 40 million monthly page requests that they handle. So you'd have to imagine how many different pages and documents they're maintaining on this site. Like Microsoft's documentation site is massive. So one of the things I've seen, I don't know if Jamstack can handle all these pages. Maybe it's hard to maintain. Well, Microsoft figured out a way to do it. So I can definitely see that, with how many documents and how many requests they get, that Jamstack, they utilize those scaling capabilities of Jamstack and reusing, page templates and things like that. I also believe they're using them. I can't remember if they're using GitHub Pages. I know a lot of their content is handled through GitHub, so I think that helps as well, at least for the maintainability aspect. And then we have Flamingo, shopflamingo.com. It's an e-commerce site that sells razors similar to, Dollar Shave Club. And what they're using is Gatsby, Contentful is their content API source, Fastly for deploying, which is another provider you could use, and Amazon S3 for, other storage. So e-commerce sites are a great candidate for Jamstack because there are so many different e-commerce platforms out there that have APIs like Shopify or even Snipcart. And Snipcart's been very vocal about Jamstack. They even have like a whole section in their blog devoted to Jamstack. So they're definitely something to keep out if you're trying to build e-commerce. And again, like you can utilize these services to handle your products, and you can focus on creating a fast UI that for users to be able to performantly see these products that you want to sell. And then this one was really interesting. JFK Terminal 4. I don't know why it's just Terminal 4. I've never been to JFK, so I don't know how that, the airport's laid out there, but hey, they use Jamstack. But it kind of made sense to me of like, well, if you need to, quickly make an announcement on your site of like, oh, here's this, here's our COVID warning here, like we're changing our policy right here. Like you want that to be quick, updated quick, and not have to, wait for a long either cache to invalidate or, just the build process to take forever. And also things like, FAQs, like maps of the terminal, and, providing you're utilizing Jamstack static features to provide that content, and then using something like an API that they probably built themselves, or they're using a third-party API of some sort to dynamically get things like flight data. What they're actually using is a platform called TakeShape.io, which is they're branded as like an overall Jamstack platform. AWS Lambdas, which is actually that's probably their search functionality. S3 and then Webpack. So as you can you're starting to see that Jamstack can provide different types of solutions for different, users' needs based on just a variety of things. And then, so I wanted to definitely talk about this. So with the topic of airlines in mind in general, now that I've, talked about JFK, we almost built a Jamstack site at Frontier Airlines. And I can't go into the exact details of it. But what we had a project where we set up microservices with Azure functions, which handled all of our data requests for third-party APIs and, our own business logic for the application. We were building a Vue front end, so to, consume that data that we needed. So we already had a solid start there. However, the one piece that really killed our Jamstack dreams was we had to integrate our Vue application with a traditional CMS. So what the problem arose that the CMS was rendering everything on the server side, and then our Vue would eventually, once that was done, would then load in their part on the client side. So it was kind of a wonky implementation. I wish we could have just made it fully Jamstack, and it would have been a way better experience, I think. But yeah, what I kind of wanted to show with this example was that even like bigger companies like a big airline like Frontier, you have the opportunity, especially if you're trying to modernize older technologies, to kind of make a push for Jamstack, and even like maybe even try to. Well, one of the talks we had at Jamstack Denver last night even was talking about selling the Jamstack, which I encourage you to find that video later. But one of the things was like, well, maybe you could try to make a push for a headless CMS, or make a push to build serverless APIs. So it's just, even giant companies that you think, I was like, oh, no way they can use Jamstack. I was like, well, we were very close, and it's simpler than you may think out of the box. And then this one this one I find really cool. So it's called Hey Sugar, and this is a community-driven project by Jamie Bradley. He actually just presented this project at the virtual Jamstack Conf that happened last week. And you can actually watch the video of his talk at the link there. I've added to these slides, which you'll be able to view the slides in the description of this video. So I apologize, the really unfriendly link. But anyway, what I find really awesome about this is he had an article on Dev 2 a while ago, like kind of explaining like this is my overall plan, this is how I want to go about it with Jamstack, and it was kind of cool to see him actually implement this now. And what he was trying to do is he was trying to solve the problem of tracking blood sugar level for diabetics. And one of the problems he discussed was diabetics have a bunch of tools available for them, but they either cost a ton out of the pocket or they have a bunch of like in-app purchases for like, diabetic tracking apps and things like that. So what he decided to do was create his own open source platform to allow users to track their own blood sugar levels and provided a platform built by and for diabetics, which I find really cool. One thing he used was Sanity.io as a data management platform, which from my understanding, it was just a content management system, but apparently you can do like actual like data storage, like kind of how a database would operate. And with that, he was able to provide things like a settings panel for users to manually, change things like, oh, I want to use imperial units versus metric units, or this is what my healthy insulin levels, my min max like healthy insulin levels are. So if it goes over that, hey, this was a day where it was high. Why was that? And then he ended up using Gatsby for a front end site, and then so that way, if there was an update for a dependency, that a user could just easily update that themselves, and they wouldn't have to do some complicated update process. And then he says he's hosting it with Netlify right now, but he mentioned in his talk that other hosting platforms could be considered. The result was a fast, secure, open source site that tracks blood sugar levels over the last 30 days and gives users an average from them to look at, or even give that over to doctors to look at if they needed to. I really highly recommend you take a look at this talk. It's a really quick, like 10-minute talk, and he goes a little bit more in depth on the app itself. It's just a really cool project of like, this is an actual problem. And he's like, all right, well, let's see what I can do with Jamstack to make this happen. And that's the kind of ingenuity and innovation that I love to see the community do with Jamstack, which is why I get really excited about it. Now, let's go into some of my personal favorite Jamstack tools that I've used so far, and then we'll go into some others that I've been keeping an eye on recently, that you may want to explore for your own applications, maybe see if they fit your use case. And again, not sponsored or paid by them. I just like their stuff. So first up, Netlify. I've talked about them a bunch already. But I use them for hosting and deploying right now. They have a great set of documentation and additional tools of how to like integrate things like form integration that you can use from them. And then they also just released a new build plugins feature to the public, which adds a lot of cool automation features to their build pipelines. So things like, I think there's one that you can, if I remember right, you can like track how accessible your site is, like through a build process, which is freaking cool. And then they give you a report of like, oh, hey, here's your score for accessibility, which it's like that. I really want to get into build plugins with Netlify. And then Sanity.io, as I mentioned already, was Hey Sugar. It's a content management system that has a ton of flexibility and customization with it. I'm using it for my own personal site as a content management system, but again, you can use this as a variety of solutions that you may need as like for data management. Kind of the idea around Sanity is structured content, which means you can go and design your base content with all the values that you need up front. You can have a bunch of references to different types of content, and then you can even do things like prototyping other structures, and then if that like is something you want to implement, you could just easily deploy that to production. It's actually very simple. It's just a simple build process to make changes to your Sanity schema. So it's a really cool and unique platform. I will say the learning curve for it can be a little complicated. It's a little weird. But once you start to like get the hang of it and you understand like, oh, this is how they want me to build this, it's a really powerful tool, I find. And then Forestry.io, if you kind of prefer working with JSON and Markdown based content and you want to keep things based just solely in a Git repo, Forestry is a great solution for a content management system. What it is that it's a Git-backed content management system, as I just stated, intended to be used with static site generators out of the box. What it essentially is doing is it's creating a UI layer that lives on top of Git and makes changes directly to whatever content you're editing into your Git repository. So kind of one of the benefits you get with that is that since you're modifying the Git repo, a lot of these CDNs, if they're looking at just that repository or like a certain branch, they see, oh hey, there was a change made. Let's just go deploy this. So you actually bypass one of the steps of having to redeploy some of your some static content that's been cached. It'll just redeploy the entire site for you. So it's kind of saving you one step that you may or may not have to do manually, which is kind of a cool feature. And then Tina CMS, this is actually a tool I like talking about. It's an open source toolkit and plugin built by the team at Forestry. And what it does is that it's hot reloading and live editing to currently React-based sites that are backed by Git. They're working on, getting other frameworks and different implementations involved. And I actually did an entire talk of this myself already. If you're more interested about it, you could actually view that on the Jamstack Denver YouTube channel if you want to hear more about Tina. And then Gridsum. So Gridsum is my preferred static site generator. One, because it's built with Vue, and I really like Vue. It's my preferred JavaScript framework right now. But also because it has a ton of integration already with things like Sanity.io. My personal site's built with Gridsum, and I find it super flexible like Gatsby, even though they haven't even reached their 1.0 release yet. What a nice feature that they're going to be including is with their 1.0 release and Vue 3 coming up shortly. Vue 3 will be supported right away when Gridsum 1.0 launches. So I think that's kind of where I'm expecting them to go. 1.0 is like, oh hey, Vue is now stable 3.0, and then Gridsum shortly arrives after. I'm gonna take a sip of water real quick if you don't mind. All right, and then Vue. You've probably heard of Vue. You probably know what it is. You may have used it. I really love Vue, not only because it was the first JavaScript framework I had to work. God, I cannot figure out the mirroring of my camera right now. Okay, I think I'm good here. And what I find it very approachable, especially if you're, you have a good JavaScript foundation, or even if you've learned React already. I find Vue just very simple to learn, just with the single file components, kind of the structure of template, script, styles, all in that. And a lot of the principle. What's nice about all these JavaScript frameworks is they share a lot of the same principles of managing state, component structure, things like that. So, but I really like Vue, and we also use it in production at Frontier Airlines today. So, and again, so let's now dived into some Jamstack tools that I've heard about and I've seen, and I'm like, all right, well, those look interesting. I want to try those at some point, and give you some flexibility of like, oh, okay, here's some recommended, and here's some other ones you should keep an eye out on. First up is Versal. It's a hosting platform in CDN similar to Netlify. I believe they're formerly called Zeit, and they changed their name recently after I think they got a big funding round or something like that. I'm not entirely sure what the differences are between them versus Netlify, but I've been seeing a lot more buzz around it, and they're built by the Next.js team. So if you already have a site built with Next, and you're looking for a new hosting platform, this could be a good option for you, since it already has a lot of built-in integration for you. Then we got Google Firebase. This is also a solid place for hosting websites, and specifically mobile apps is something it's kind of focused around, or at least that seemed like it was started on. I actually deployed a site that's still live called spiritedhooves.com. It's a site for my mom's horseboarding business. I kind of started there before I even learned about Netlify. So they have a lot of other features, like things like Firestore for a couple different types of hosting data. And again, they have some extra mobile app deployment features and some add-ons you can throw in with that. And then Azure Static Web Apps. I told you Microsoft was making a big push for Jamstack this year, and they did that at their build conference by announcing Static Web Apps. It seems like it's going to be a competitor to Netlify, but what's really cool is they already support the major frameworks, Angular, React, Vue, and even Svelte. So I know a lot of people were really impressed that, oh, hey, they support Svelte day one with this. That's freaking awesome, because I know people are really, really starting to get attached to Svelte now. And then these are a bunch of different CMS headless CMS platforms: Craft, Prismic, Agility, and Strappy. They all provide some really solid solutions. I've looked at a couple of these already, but I eventually went and chose Sanity just because I liked the way they kind of did things. Not to say these platforms are bad, but they did solve different problems that I was trying to do something else with. So again, they kind of have their own unique things about them, but the core thing is they're all headless CMSs. Actually, if you wanted to learn more about how to choose a CMS, the Syntax FM podcast like this week did an episode about choosing a headless CMS. So yeah, it's really kind of coincided with this really conveniently for me. And also Strappy just released a stable version of their community edition. So congrats to Strappy there, and you can go try it out if you want. And then we got 11T. I already mentioned 11T a little bit earlier, but it's really designed to be a super performant static site generator right out of the gate. And everyone just seems really happy about using it. Like I've been seeing more and more sites it's like, hey, I moved my site to 11T and it's freaking awesome. So I really want to understand what's the buzz around 11T. And also just something I really appreciate is they went with a possum as their mascot. It's like a little possum hanging from a balloon. I believe they call him opossum. So it's just fun. I like the fun branding, these tech framework, not tech frameworks, but just all these new tools and things are coming out. Like Tina CMS uses a llama as their mascot. So, it's fun to see. And then Redwood JS, you may or may not have heard about this one. So it's a JavaScript framework. I know another JavaScript framework. Do we really need another one of those? It just seems like there's too many of them. But something that they state on their GitHub repo is, quote, Redwood is an opinionated full stack serverless web application that will allow you to build and deploy Jamstack applications with ease. So one of the devs who created Redwood is Tom Preston Werner, who was a co-founder of GitHub and creator of Jekyll. And I'm very personally interested in Redwood because even though it's an alpha, there was a very interesting talk he actually did on the Full Stack Radio podcast about like some of the decisions and problems he was trying to solve with Redwood. And it just seems like they're trying to, a lot of these Jamstack tools are like, they're kind of a la carte, and this one's really trying to be like, this is a fully encompassed Jamstack application that we're making. So it is very opinionated, so you may not like things that they're doing, but it's definitely something to keep an eye on, especially since it's an alpha, and they're like, if you want to make an impact with it, like now's the time to do that. So highly recommend you check it out. And then Svelte. I've already mentioned Svelte a bunch, but it's a lightweight JavaScript framework designed to be what the term I believe they use is cybernetically enhanced. So I'm still trying to understand the benefits, just because it seems like it kind of just boils down to pure HTML and JavaScript on the front end. That's really what they're trying to do. And it's just like, it's a super lightweight framework that gets compiled down. It's like 20K, I think, base or something for just the framework. And it seems like it's getting more and more traction every day, especially with the static site generator Sapper being built with it. But yeah, there's so many other Jamstack tools that are coming out here. But I hope you kind of got an idea of like some ones that you may want to go mess around with, or you've used them before, and you want to maybe you want to build a Jamstack app now that's like, oh, I've worked with that before, but I didn't build a Jamstack frame application. So let's do that. And that's it. You're now certified Jamstack experts. Congratulations, everyone. You did it. See how easy that was. But in all seriousness, I hope that it cleared up like some things about what Jamstack is and isn't, and maybe even gave you some ideas of how to approach your next project in maybe a Jamstack way, or even again make those pushes out your day-to-day job of like, hey, we could do some really cool things with Jamstack. Like let's try to move in this direction. And again, if there's anything I hope you take away from this, it's that it can be used for so much more than a blog and portfolio site. Like there's a lot of substance there. Like you've seen with Hey Sugar, just e-commerce platforms in general. Like there's a lot of great stuff you can do with Jamstack, and I feel like it's finally starting to pick up traction. People are starting to like figure out like, oh, okay, we can build this with Jamstack. Let's do that. But yeah. And then these are some extra Jamstack resources you can look at. Jamstack.org is a great starting point. Free Code Camp, where I got that image from earlier about the acronym, has a lot of good Jamstack content as well. Snipcart again also has a lot, like a whole blog category dedicated to Jamstack, which is really cool to see. They even have like a tutorial for Redwood if you're interested of how to build an e-commerce platform with it. Um, and there's also a lot of great community content on Dev2. There you can follow the Jamstack topic. And you even feel free to join the Jamstack Slack. There's a lot of great people out there that's very welcoming and helpful. And you can even talk to people like, Phil Hawksworth of Netlify. And I'm pretty sure Matt Billman chills around there as well if you want to go say, hey, thanks for coining Jamstack for us. And then these are the use resources I use to put this talk together. Again, specific articles that to kind of enhance the content I already knew about Jamstack. And yeah, that's it. Thanks so much for watching. That's you can find me on Twitter at Zakanin with the 0. I'm on the Denver Dev Slack at Zach_Brooks. You can check out my blog if you. I'm gonna hopefully put this like more content out with this within this year, including this talk, as like an actual like blog post if you prefer some text-based content. And again, like check us out at Jamstack Denver. We host it every first Wednesday of the month. And we're gonna keep being remote until we know it's safe for sure. So keep an eye on that. And yeah, I'm happy to take any questions you guys have in the chat now. Just give you all a second here. Yeah, James there, I see you. You've also used 11T. Yeah, I mean, I don't know. I haven't looked at it enough, but it looks really, really cool. Like, people seem to love it. Let's give people a few extra minutes here. Again, hope you all enjoyed that. And now you kind of know some more about Jamstack, and when you see that term, it may not, throw you off. Well, I'm not seeing any more questions, but give me just a minute. Here we go. Perfect. All right, Ivan Wilson. Is there a set number of application API calls that you think is excessive for an application? All right. If you I believe you're referring to like say the client side. I guess it kind of depends on what kind of API you're making. At least for the example we use with Frontier, say in a perfect world, if it's in a perfect world, if we had our way at Frontier where we were able to, fully build that Jamstack app, I guess one thing I would have tried to do is minimize the response times that we were getting. I don't know if there's necessarily a set limit that you'd have. I guess it kind of depends on, I would say like the initial number of API calls you want to reduce as much as possible and try to keep it like maybe down to like just like a handful, like maybe 3 to 4. And it kind of varies on like, oh, this one's a very tiny API request versus this very large set of data that we need. And there's no way to make it non-static or actually make it static. So kind of just depends on the scenario. I don't know if there's a specific rule to say like, oh, you 100% you can only use 5 API calls on your client. Like, I don't know if there's a specific rule to that. Just it's kind of a call to make yourself, depending on the application you're building. And then David, opinion, how much change of mindset is required for the dev team to be successful? I believe you're referring to like trying to transition them to like a Jamstack mindset. I mean, at Frontier, when we were trying to do that, we didn't have too much pushback. We were able, I guess, we had a pushback trying to use Azure functions because there was some concern of like, oh, what happens if those go down or things like that. Oh, man, we got a cameo from my cat. So I don't know how it's going to depend on team to team. Like if some of them are pretty, they want to build cutting edge stuff. Like I feel like that could be a big sell for them. And again, I think even if if there's a lot of pushback, maybe try to introduce, or like even ask questions of like, well, why don't you think like a serverless architecture will work for us, or maybe even some concerns around that. So I guess it kind of, I hate to say it depends team to team, but it truly does. I mean, and it also depends on the group of developers you're working with. Maybe if you're working with some older developers that are like kind of stuck in their ways, it could be a little harder. But I think even trying to like find similar technologies that they're familiar with could definitely like help sell your point. If that kind of answers your question or not. Oh, can I just flop down? I'll give us a couple more minutes here. Because I know I forget there's a delay on stream. Yeah, I was happy to speak, Jason. I'm glad you gave me the opportunity and worked with my schedule a little bit there. I hope, yeah, I'm looking forward to hearing what you end up building. With that, I think that about covers it. Yeah, definitely. Thanks for asking, Richard or David. Yeah, so again, thanks for tuning in. This will be on YouTube, I think soon. I think this goes. I don't know. I forget how long YouTube takes, but yeah. Again, thanks for watching, everyone.
Sometimes I have to keep on breathing in. My lungs are filled with too much pain. All the shadows of the past that I'm so leaving, they held me in my sleepless nights. And I'm drowning in the noise like a free